In the United States of America and other developed countries, infant and child vaccination is optional, not forced. I visited the local United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF office, and I am in Babane, in the capital city of Eswatini. I visited the UNICEF office when my baby girl was 5 months old. I was experiencing what the academics call vaccine hesitancy, which is distrust of the therapy that is vaccination for various reasons. I had already been threatened at this point by Xolile Fagutse. That's Xolile Fagutse of Eswatini's Commission on Human Rights, an organ of the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. I had been threatened by Fagutse with prosecution for the reason of child abuse through neglect of my baby's medical needs. She was about to call a social worker at the Deputy Prime Minister's office, which has oversight of the Child and Social Welfare Ministry or Department. So she was about to call a social worker at the DPM's office on her mobile phone to set this prosecution in motion. And I told her that I would rather seek the advice of the Public Health Unit, which has oversight of two major health programs in the country of Eswatini, namely the National HIV Program and the Pediatric Program, which is called the Primary Healthcare Program. My name is Nomvuyo Mncina, and I am bringing you the 4th episode of my podcast, Raising Butterflies. In the next episode of Raising Butterflies, I will share with you the child protection laws Fagutse cited in her opinion that I should not be allowed to decline the national vaccination schedule for clients of Eswatini's public health facilities who are invariably native citizens exclusively, blacks, because rich blacks and the members of other racial groups in our country can afford private healthcare consultations at Eswatini's more costly clinics. That means the medical right of privacy is for sale in Eswatini. A human right that is enshrined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which outlines all of the liberties which countries that are members of the United Nations are obligated to protect and advance. That right is sold in the Kingdom of Eswatini on the basis of race and economic class, because there is no way of investigating whether the wealthier citizens and expatriate communities adhere to any government mandate to present their babies and young children for the forced vaccination, which Fagutse was attempting to subject me to. Why do I say that the right of privacy is sold by Eswatini's Public Health Administration? There are many examples. I'm going to focus on the two programs that I mentioned earlier, which are the National Primary Healthcare Program, which is the Pediatric Program, and the National HIV Program. This is how the right of privacy interplays or presents in these two programs in Eswatini. When it comes to the vaccination of children, which is the pediatric program, the clients who attend the public facilities do not have privacy. They do not have the opportunity to decide whether or not to have their children vaccinated, to discuss it as parents of the children at the level of the household, and be able to make a decision at that level that is going to be constitutionally protected, so that when they do attend the government hospitals or the government's healthcare facilities, that privacy can be honored by whichever nurses who attend to them when they get there. But what happens when we go to the government hospitals and the healthcare facilities is that the nurses do not even ask us what our desire is concerning the vaccination of our infants. From the day that they're born, there are vaccinations that are administered to the infants. From the day that they're born. And it's not a question. And yet, in private healthcare facilities, and I know this because I have had the experience of giving birth at Mbabane Clinic, which is a private healthcare facility. And there was no vaccination, and there was no talk of vaccination. I am the one who then went to the Mbabane government hospital to present my baby for vaccination. That's when I had my son, and this was in 2010. And so it means that the Mbabane Clinic is aware that I have the right to be spoken to as a reasoning individual, as the mother of a baby, to be spoken to as a reasoning individual who is sovereign. It also means that the child vaccination or the infant vaccination is a service. It's a service, not an obligation. And a service is something that the consumer has the freedom to decide whether or not they need that service, to decide what their well-being needs, and as a parent, what the well-being of my child needs. So it's a service. It's not a deadline. It's not a law. It cannot be. It cannot be, and it is not a law to have one's baby vaccinated from the day that they are born, on the day that they are born, and then to be given dates by the nurse for you to return your baby when the nurse says so. Regardless what other events may be taking place in the baby's life, medically, physiologically. For example, there are contraindications for many of these vaccination products. There are conditions that are contraindicated, meaning if those conditions are present in the situation of the client, in the baby, then the vaccination is advised against. Some of those conditions include seizures. Some of the vaccinations, like the polio vaccination, is contraindicated for babies who are experiencing seizures or who have experienced seizures in their recent past. My baby, my 5-month-old baby, on whose behalf I was going to the office of the Commission on Human Rights and to UNICEF to inquire about what was legal and best practice for me as a mother. My baby had suffered seizures when she turned 1 month old. She suffered seizures because of saline nasal drops that were administered to her at the Mbabane clinic. And it is at the Mbabane clinic that I eventually managed to obtain treatment for those seizures. The delay in obtaining that treatment for my baby, that treatment happened 5 days later, and it's because the front desk did not want to share the details of the doctor who had administered the saline nasal drops to the baby. They were covering up for the doctor. And so I ended up being forced to go to a different clinic where it was difficult to have them believe the cause and effect event that had caused the seizures, to have them believe that it was saline nasal drops administered in Mbabane clinic. So they were then forcing a course of antibiotics on my baby, whereas the cause of the seizures was not microbial. It wasn't bacterial, it wasn't viral, it wasn't fungal. It was a pharmaceutical product that had been administered at the Mbabane clinic. I explained all this to both Xolile Fagutse and the UNICEF official that I spoke to. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name, but I know that I could be able to get it at the front desk because I would meet the same receptionist who referred me to this official at the United Nations premises. The point I want to make is, after explaining to both these officials everything that I had gone through, nearly losing my baby's life in this manner because of not being listened to, and then requesting a delay in this alleged obligation that I have to submit my baby, present my baby for forced immunization, for forced vaccination, a reality that I was only experiencing because I was black, and it was assumed by the UNICEF official that I could not afford a consultation at a private healthcare facility. And so he dealt with me as somebody who is not aware that there are differences in the way that the United Nations World Health Organization guidelines about vaccination are administered. They are guidelines in a private healthcare facility, but they are said to be a law in a public or government healthcare facility where one can be prosecuted for breaching that law. These are two contrasting realities. So one of them is false. Which reality is false? Is it the reality of the wealthy Liswati, the wealthy black woman, the Indian woman, the Chinese woman, the white woman, their reality, their shared reality, where they can afford a consultation fee of 350 amalangeni and upwards, and be afforded their right of privacy be afforded their right of agency, of autonomy to decide what is best for their child, that they can do with all of the information that has been freely and respectfully given to them? Is that the false reality? Or is the false reality that of the poor Black Swati woman who the UNICEF official assumed I was? And possibly Fagutse as well at the Human Rights Commission. Was it based on the assumption that I am too poor to find out a different reality, to find out about a different reality that is being afforded to other citizens on the basis of race and economic class? Did they bully me because they assumed I did not have the economic resources to know better, or to find myself in a position where I had access to more information, and in fact, factual information? In fact, the time period for which they were contraindicated was 2 years. So it is said by the CDC that if your baby has had seizures within the last 2 years, the guideline from the World Health Organization is to delay the vaccination until the baby's health issue has been resolved and enough time has passed to restore the confidence of the parent in obtaining that service. And the operative word is service, not obligatory event in the child's medical history. I have a hypothesis that if vaccinated babies and young children were assessed in terms of their hair growth and compared with unvaccinated babies and young children, I have a hypothesis that unvaccinated children would have better hair growth. It's not an original idea of mine. There is literature that can be found on online libraries on the web that some vaccines cause alopecia areata, which is balding. Vaccines are not the only pharmaceutical products that are known to cause hair loss. As a former user of the product valproic acid, which goes by the trading name Epilim, and also having seen Epilim at work in my baby, because that is the treatment that she received when she got seizures from saline nasal drops. We administered Epilim to her with the doctor, a general practitioner at Mbabane Clinic, because the pediatrician was on holiday. And at Women and Children's Clinic is where the general practitioner there was forcing antibiotics on my baby, which I refused. So we used Epilim on the baby, and she had had a full head of hair before that, but that's written on, on the leaflet that comes with the medication. And quite frankly, it is a necessary concession. It was a necessary concession because the seizures were life-threatening. There is another pharmaceutical product that is known to cause hair loss, and it is the cocktail of antiretroviral drugs or products that are in distribution, in dispensation in Eswatini and in the region in Southern Africa. I had to take this treatment for a month as post-exposure prophylaxis or prevention of feared or suspected HIV infection. And I experienced hair loss. It was alopecia areata because it was thinning of the hair, especially along the hairline. And I mentioned that I had used valproic acid earlier in my life, and that had the same effect of a thinning hairline. I've already mentioned that that's the effect that my baby experienced as well. Another product that I know is responsible for slowed hair regrowth is the contraceptive product Diane 35, which I used, and the generic brands of estrogens and progesterones. I think I used one called, well, I've forgotten its name entirely, but I only bought that one because the pharmacy was out of stock for Diane 35. But that said, Diane 35 saved my life after the disastrous effects of HIV post-exposure prophylaxis, because what the HIV drugs did was increase my androgens, or my male hormone, in my body, and that changed my appearance and depleted the fat pockets in my body, which was great for my body but not so great for my face. It's a less feminine appearance to have a leaner face, I would say. So that's what happened to my face after that treatment, and it's Diane 35 that restored the plumpness of my face, which I had before the treatment. So, shout out to Diane 35. But even the company will tell you that it's not a permanent treatment. So one should not use hormonal supplements like crack or use them as it shouldn't be an addictive cosmetic therapy. So you shouldn't get it over the counter just because it makes you look good, because ultimately there have been reported cases of cancer dating way back to the 60s when these therapies started to be used. So that research is available, and it's not hidden by these companies that responsible use of hormone replacements is important. So I really appreciate products like Diane 35, but I have to say that it is better to use it for the shortest possible effective time to correct whatever serious issue is taking place in the body. And for me, it wasn't just a cosmetic issue having an imbalance of my male and female hormones, but it also had effects on my bone health, and I suffered from what they call fibromyalgia, which is inflammation of the bones and the muscles, along with myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is inflammation of the central nervous system, and a feeling of fog. They call it brain fog. Like it feels like you need 20 cups of coffee before you feel remotely alert enough to attempt any task. So these are pretty debilitating conditions, and that's why I resorted to hormone therapy. But I speak about all this because I'm passionate about healing, and I'm passionate about womanhood. I'm passionate about being African and Black and putting my best foot forward for my race. That's important to me because of the insulting oppression that we exist under in Eswatini and in the continent of Africa and in the United States of America, where the police brutality is pronounced and the genocide of my race is more explicit, it's more visible, more perceptible. So there are less perceptible ways in which a race is subjugated, and these ways include stereotypes that are intended to mock our race, and we are bullied as a race into accepting such mockery as a type of humor, as socially acceptable, and are pressured to think that we're being a wet blanket or a spoiled sport if we don't find these tropes and stereotypes funny, like Black people not being able to swim and Black people being nappy-headed, not having good hair, quote unquote. We can swim. We can swim because I swam when I was 5 years old and left in the swimming pool unattended and had never been in a swimming pool before. I swam. I found myself in the deep end. My feet couldn't touch the floor. I was bobbing in the water for quite a while. But eventually I swam until someone was able to get me out of the water. I was swimming and no one taught me how to. So my son swam. He was 7 years old. He was fortunately supervised because my whole family was there and there were other guests at the resort. So we watched him slip off the wall of the shallow end of the pool and end up in the deep part of the pool, and he doggy paddled back to the safe part of the pool while we were watching. So I watched my son swim, and he had never been taught before. So Black people swim. Swimming it's an adaptive intelligence. and black people have this. Africans know that. Eswati, Bafana Bashal Tatam. I think that's what it's called. I've always found that expression really funny. Shal Tatam. But it's basically breaststroke. That's what it is. It's just that the boys in the rural areas in the countryside jumping into rivers, deep rivers, and treading those depths and doing somersaults off of trees and diving into deep waters and swimming. Black people swim. This is something that is known, but we have to listen to media content coming from the United States, where our race is especially subjugated culturally, and have to listen to this idea being propagated that black people can't swim. And then we forget, we black people in Africa, in Eswatini, forget that we are swimming in the rivers. We have been. So I started this discussion intending to focus on the wrongfully mandated aspects of the public health administration. Those guidelines, those services that are then used to hurt our race, to target us for therapies that are superfluous, therapies that cause more harm than good, that are not justified, that are not required, that are not necessary for our health. Because even HIV does not need to be medicated as prophylaxis, because a lifestyle and nutrition that are sound are enough prophylaxis. This was always the standard from the health administration globally, and it only changed in sub-Saharan Africa. It's only in sub-Saharan Africa where prophylactic antiretroviral treatment is obligatory, where a patient has to begin taking medication as soon as they are diagnosed with the presence of the virus in their body, even if their CD4 cell count is healthy. So unilaterally, everybody's CD4 count is boosted. Everybody who has tested HIV positive, even if their CD4 count is normal, optimal, they're still given antiretroviral therapy to boost their CD count. And that causes autoimmune disease, a side effect. And the side effect is not reported in our country. And yet, the evidence is abundant. It is abundant in the literature belonging to the CDC, belonging to national libraries in the United States, belonging to universities in the United States. The evidence is there that there are such side effects. They are reported by patients, but there isn't even one report in our country, and yet visibly one is able to spot a patient of the antiretroviral therapy. It is possible to take one look at a person and know from the depleted fat pockets in their face and in their body, from the uneven distribution of fat, to concentrated in the upper body, to hair thinning and amelanation of the hair, where the hair loses its melanin and is literally bleached by the chemicals in this medication, so that it will go from black to a brown color, and in the sun it looks even paler than that. So these are highly reactive chemicals, and we are expected as black people and black women to just suck it up. Under the guise that our lives are being saved. Our lives are not being saved. Our lives are not being saved. They're being degraded. We're being taken in a healthy condition when we enter these public health facilities, where we are forced to take medications that we don't need. And then we find ourselves with all of these complications that I've just outlined, and we're told that we should be grateful. So just as the National Primary Health Care Program, the infant immunization or vaccination program, is compulsory for blacks selectively and not the other races, because they don't have to attend the government facilities. They're able to go to private facilities where they get to choose whether or not they want to have their babies vaccinated. It is the same with the National HIV program. It is the problem of black citizens in Eswatini exclusively. It's not a problem that an Indian citizen or a white citizen or a Chinese citizen has to face in Eswatini. They will never be obligated, tested against their will for HIV. That's happened to me at the Mbabane clinic. A gynecologist, Dr. Ahmed, tested me for HIV without even telling me that he was going to do that. I mean, sure, I tested negative, but why? Why would you do that? You know, but he did. And that's just how it rolls. When you are my color in this country, it hurts. It hurts. It's not right. It is so wrong. So even money and high benefit medical aid couldn't protect me from that bit of medical apartheid at Mbabane Clinic. So if I could experience that with the economic resources that I had, then I suppose it shouldn't surprise me what I saw from a different economic background. And that was a friend of mine who was being chased by the police at the bidding of her mother and her younger sister to have her detained for involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, to force her to take HIV antiretroviral therapy. She had been diagnosed 7 years prior and had been living healthily with the condition. And in 2015, the SADC heads of state, President Zuma and King Eswatini and King Letsi, and I think it was still President Ian Khama in Botswana. These leaders of Southern African countries decided that they were going to allow the United Nations World Health Organization to issue this guideline in our region. And still, it was only a guideline, so it made absolutely no sense why my friend Dengetile Dlamini was being chased by the police and held for 3 months at the National Psychiatric Hospital in Manzini until she took her first dose of HIV antiretroviral drugs. And on that day, she was allowed to go back home. Is that still the spirit of brotherhood that the United Nations espouses towards developing countries? Is that still the mandate? Or are we just being fucked with now? Are we just being violated in the name of bilateral and multilateral help? So I bring you back to the stereotype that Black people have bad hair. And I ask you that given all of these circumstances that I've outlined, all of these medical disasters, these disasters of national medical malpractice targeted at a specific racial group, does it not make sense why our hair growth would be troubled? And is it something to laugh at? Is it an acceptable way to joke, knowing that this genocide is in place, is in progress? Are these jokes appropriate? Are they sensitive? Are they respectful? No. No, they're not. They're not. When I decided to start recording this episode, I just wanted to do a hair compilation. Initially, my idea was just a hair reel, because I get a lot of good hair days. I get a lot of good hair days, and I just wanted to showcase that. And yeah, I was literally just gonna talk about how great my hair looks, but I thought that I would do a beauty with purpose thing and talk about the ways in which the beauty of my race is targeted with violence at the political, economic, and cultural levels of our existence. I remember at Christ the King Primary School in Tlatikulu, the small town where I was born and attended my early primary schooling, I remember that we had to cut our hair. We were only blacks in the school, but at some point an Indian teacher came to the school and he had a daughter who attended the primary school, and she had bangs and shoulder length hair, and she didn't have to cut her hair. It wasn't even spoken about. Oh, and the other person who didn't have to cut her hair was a biracial girl in my class, and that was the only biracial student in the primary school, and the only other biracial students were in secondary school, and they didn't have to cut their hair either. So that was wild. Or maybe, I remember that it wasn't necessarily that you had to cut your hair, but you could not wear hair extensions. Like you couldn't wear long braids, because that's the hairstyle that I came to the school with. I had long braids, and I needed to get a haircut because it wasn't allowed at the school. So just this idea that you are limited as a black student as to how to wear your hair is weird, because I mean, what does anyone care if my hair looks longer? Why is it offensive? Why is it an offensive sight? Why is it a worrying sight that a black African girl has long hair? Because I can grow my hair longer, but while I'm waiting to grow my hair longer, why does it offend anyone if I weave in extensions into my hair to make it look longer? These are just questions that a person needs to ask themselves, while you have sayings going around like there's no racism in Eswatini. I beg to differ, because if there wasn't, then you wouldn't have our race under a magnifying glass being policed about how far we can go in enhancing our looks, when the other races are not policed in that manner. I remember my literature teacher in high school in 10th grade breaking my heart. It broke my heart because I idolized the woman. I thought she was a rock star and she was white. So I wore my hair in a sort of, it was an afro. Yeah, it wasn't a sort of afro. It was an afro, and I wore a headband that had a corsage on it, a black corsage, so it didn't clash with my school uniform. And she said, I'm doing too much with my hair, in not so many words. But I just remember her even shaking her head and saying, we should not be allowed. We shouldn't be allowed to do so much in high school. And yet there were the white and biracial students dyeing their hair pink, whatever color they wanted. Like, they could do whatever they wanted. And this lady took issue because my hair looks good when I comb it out. And that was heartbreaking, because she has these long blonde tresses down to her back, and I don't understand, what does it take away? What does it take away from her if I am wearing what I have happily? All these attitudes are microaggressions, and collectively they constitute the culture of racial discrimination and racial segregation and racially motivated political oppression. So, you know, hair is really a symbol of a lot more than just beauty and strength. It really is. It's a political statement to have good hair when you are black, because of these stereotypes that are being forced upon us by the sadism of racism. All right, I'm gonna sign off now. This is Raising Butterflies. It's episode 4. Remember, episode 5, we're gonna look at Xolile Fagutse's arguments from the Child Protection Act as to why I should lose custody or be jailed for not wanting my baby to be vaccinated against polio, measles, rubella, mumps, all of these medieval no, not medieval, I don't mean that, but basically we even need to talk about these diseases, how they came about, and what the science history of them is, so we can understand our homeland security from that point of view. I look forward to that discussion. Thanks for exploring this issue with me. All right.